Welcome to Sversity. I'm Krishna. Sversity is a learning service from Koyya Enterprises. In this session, I will suggest a learning path to gain command over the MERN Full-stack development. A learning path is essentially a flow chart kind of a thing where you will be seeing like where to start and what to cover. And by when we can say like we learned most of the stuff. So this picture gives you a basic idea. It starts from SDLC. You need to know a bit of SDLC. Then you need to know a bit of HTML, especially DOM manipulation on the browser. You need to know a bit of JavaScript basics. After HTML, it is JavaScript basics, then DOM manipulation. Follow this orange line. And then you need to know a bit about styling with CSS3 and responsive design, the way you develop the front-end applications. Bootstrap, which is a useful tool in speeding up the front-end development. And then comes the Node platform, how it works, and then enterprise applications. What they are actually, and what it takes to develop the applications, and etc. And then Express framework, and followed by that, you do something related to React, React state management, React component styling. And once it is done, you switch to the database engineering, and there you spend time on MongoDB integration, and finally you will be deploying the application. This is one suggested learning path. See, there is nothing called a universally acceptable learning path meeting all the requirements of all the people. There is nothing like that. This is one suggested learning path, especially for the people who are already having some programming idea. If you are completely new to programming, then this is not suggested. If you know programming in any programming language, that doesn't matter. You know how to develop, how to implement logic. You know a bit about data structures. You know what is web development in general, like what is client, what is server, and such kind of stuff. Basic overview. If you have such kind of stuff, then this is a good start. Okay, now we'll get into each of these areas to see like what is that we cover in each of these steps. Right, so let's start from the SDLC. You know, SDLC stands for Software Development Lifecycle, very old word we know, abbreviation we know. So here you need to understand what is SDLC. You need to understand how do you collect requirements, how do you analyze requirements, how do you document requirements, and etc. That all comes under requirements engineering. You may not go deep into any of these things, but you need to have a good idea about like how an application is developed, right? Unless you have that idea, whatever technology you learn, it is like a tool without a goal. So once we learn once you understand what is requirements engineering, then you look at how do you design and architect a product. Here you'll be understanding like, let's say, how do you create markup screens? How do you design the entire application? If it is going to be based on object orientation, for example, you may come up with the class diagrams. If it is, or it may be a database design, something like that. You need to know a bit about how the products are designed and architected at an overall level. Then coding and testing. What do you do as part of coding, right? You just don't write code. You need to use code repositories. You go through different processes like reviews, testing, unit testing, and integration testing, compilation. And you have something called continuous integration, you need to know a few things about each of these areas. And finally, deployment, like how do you actually deploy them? Server deployment are using the new age deployment techniques like container deployment, containerization, and container deployment. So these are all the things that you need to have a bird's eye view on them. All right. Once you have this understanding within this context, you will be learning a technology to accomplish this for a given product. Suggestion is that even though at every level you will be learning different concepts, but you take a small case study and try to implement that case study as you go on across these stages. Okay, so next stage is HTML. We start with the easiest one. So in HTML, you need to understand basic things like what is HTML, what are those elements, and etc. How do you organize the content? How do you structure the content using lists, tables, and etc. How do you design forms? And how do you embed links, images, and other multimedia? Enough. You are done with HTML. And then move on to JavaScript. That is the programming language of MERN. If you are working on MERN, you are working on JavaScript. You need to spend a good amount of time in gaining as much command as possible on JavaScript. So understand basic things first, like what are those operators, operations, how do you take decisions, how do you iterate through using loops, how do you write reusable code using functions, and when you are using these functions, blocks, and etc., how these scopes work, right? What those scopes are. And then how do you embed this JavaScript into HTML? And what is that JSON data structure is all about? How do you read JSON? How do you build JSON? How do you parse JSON? And how do you finally, when you are developing a web page, how this HTML and JavaScript together work for you? This is basics. Next, go to DOM manipulation. This is also by using JavaScript only, but this is completely browser related stuff. So here you understand what is that document object model of the browser APIs essentially. So understand what those events that get generated on a browser. How do you handle those events? How do you write that event handlers? And how do you connect those event handlers to various events and the what do you call sources of the events? How do you manipulate the DOM as part of event manipulation? Means how do you add elements to the DOM tree? How do you remove elements from the DOM tree? How do you reposition the elements in the DOM tree? You need to know those things. Only then you can develop the really dynamic and interactive web pages of your web application. MERN is all about developing a full stack web application, right? End to end, front end as well as back end. So DOM manipulation is mainly focused on developing the web-based user interfaces or web-based front ends. And finally, form handling, also part of this DOM manipulation. Here also, how do you collect the form elements? How do you do validations and etc.? How do you submit it to the server and such kind of stuff? Right. So with this fourth stage, you will be able to develop some useful front-end applications, but they lack appeal. They have behavior functionality, but they may lack appeal. To add appeal, we need to have styling. So that's where you get into CSS or the cascading style sheets. So there you understand what is actually CSS, how do you embed CSS, what those inline styles, external, internal, and all that stuff. And then understand what is the syntax for selectors, how do you use colors and fonts, the borders, padding, margins, displays, positioning. There are a huge number of CSS selectors are there, huge number of CSS properties are out there. But these things are primary, right? These things are fundamental. Unless you know these things, you cannot develop anything useful CSS styles. Right? Once you learn these many selectors and properties, probably you'll be developing most of the kinds of style sheets for most of the applications that we see in day-to-day use. From CSS, the next step in styling is understanding what is that responsive design. User interface is not just UI, it is also about UX, that is user experience, right? It's not that you develop the application or you develop the front end according to your interests. You need to develop the front end in such a way that the end user feel good about it. It should it should appeal to them. They should be able to easily use your application, and it should add value to your application overall, for which you need to go with some concept called responsive design, so that your application works not only for one particular device like mobile, but different mobile devices with different resolutions, desktops, and etc. So there you understand what is actually responsive design in the sixth stage. There you understand media queries, transformations, transitions, animations. So these are a little additional, little advanced styling that you do to make your applications front end much more intuitive, useful, and appealing. Once you learn these fundamentals, then you get to know like, okay, many of these things are useful, but they are taking a lot of time. So that's where you will be using different varieties of frameworks and libraries. Bootstrap is one of the most popular one. There is another thing called Tailwind also that is recently very popular. You can use any one of them. We just suggest Bootstrap. As I said, this is just a suggested learning path. Either you may use Bootstrap or you may use Tailwind or anything else that of your choice. But learn something of this nature so that developing style sheets should become just like a breeze. So if it is Bootstrap, you understand like how do you create grids, forms, various widgets, nav bars, and whatnot. All right. So this is about the stage 7. By the end of this one, you will be able to develop the front end of the applications, and you will gain much more command on your JavaScript as well. Programming logic, logic development, code organization, all those things, you'll be getting much more command on them. But still, you have a lot more to cover. The next step is to get into the back end. Once, I'm not saying front end is completed yet. We are done with front end to some level. Now let us switch our focus onto the back end. In the back end, you will be using Node for MERN stack. So you understand what is that Node, its basics. And when you are working on Node, you definitely be using just not browser-based JavaScript. You will be using little advanced concepts of JavaScript. So you understand those ECMA basics, TypeScript's basics. TypeScript is a layer on top of ECMA script or JavaScript, which adds support for typing of the JavaScript. In other words, you say it adds type system to the JavaScript. So learning large-scale applications using JavaScript is a little cumbersome unless you use something like TypeScript. And you also understand like how do you once you use TypeScript and other things, you cannot just write code and distribute. You'll have to take care of it's not compilation, but there is something you need to do, a few steps you need to follow so that you will be getting a distributable image. And how do you actually deploy this application? Whatever front-end application you develop so far, you need to deploy it on some server, right? So you'll be understanding like how do you deploy that front-end application on the node-based web server, right? So with this, you'll be able to see that your application is now running and it is accessible over the network on the browser. But front end is using front end, you can develop a lot of useful applications like games and a lot of stuff you can do. But if it is an enterprise application with database support and other things, you definitely require backend. So that is the next stage. So enterprise application, you need to first understand what do you mean by enterprise application? and how Node and NPM are useful in that case. You need to understand how do you manage your project, right? You need to know a bit about project management uh, to develop the applications at an enterprise scale. You have to learn a little more about ES6, that is ECMS script, little more about TypeScript at this level. When I say you develop a little more about ES6 and TypeScript, you will be, these things are useful. These things are essential for you to develop complex, what do you call, computational logic. You require those kind of stuff, right? So this is where you will be learning about, let's say, generators. You will be learning about object orientation. You will be learning about modular programming. You will be learning about promises, async await. All these things you will be learning at this stage. Basically, by the end of this stage, you are good at ES6 and TypeScript, so that you can develop any business application. Okay, then comes the Express framework. This is the place where you will be learning how to expose the business logic to your clients using REST API. So you understand what is that REST, its fundamentals. You should be able to design REST API. So there you will be dealing with the get operations, post, put, delete majorly. So once you know like how to develop this API, how to process these API requests by receiving what do you call JSON payloads and responding with JSON payloads by doing whatever computation you do, done. You are now ready to develop the backend, of course, without the database support at this point. You're ready to develop the backend computational logic, and you are ready to expose it to the front end, and front end is already ready to consume these services. Then comes again another productivity tool called React.js library. This library helps you to develop the front end in much more productive way. So whatever you have learned in the front end so far, those bootstrap, responsive design, CSS, this is the knowledge that you must have very good command on those areas to develop this React based UI. Once you start developing applications using React.js, you may not again write anything using basic HTML, basic CSS and basic JavaScript any longer. Okay, so now we are upgrading ourselves into next level. So React components, right? React components are the primary building blocks for a React.js application. So there you'll understand what they are, what is that extended JavaScript, that is JSX. And initially you'll be learning how to develop stateless components and how do you compose them, and the concept of what is that property drilling, its pros and cons. At the next stage, you'll be developing stateful applications by understanding something called React hooks, and state management at the component level, state management at the application level. And also there is one more library called Redux, which is also useful in developing the application state. So that also maybe it is good to learn to develop React applications. And React components also require styling, right? So here you will be using React styles. Maybe you will try to style the components using, maybe you can try Tailwind at this point, because you know Bootstrap already, you can try Tailwind, looks similar. You may also introduce routes in the React applications, and using React framework, how do you consume the REST API? There are also some hooks. You can learn those hooks so that you can make the application much more professionally looking. Okay, so with this, you have backend as well as front end deployed on a Node server. But only thing is that we do not have any persistence support at this point. And that is going to be the focus of next level. So you need to understand a bit about database engineering first. At this level, you understand what is databases are, what are these databases, what is that relational database management system, and how do you write SQL queries. You should just have if you never have seen them, At least you need to see them once. Even though we do not use them in the MERN, but having an idea about them will greatly be useful for you to develop the persistence layer in the MERN stack. So once you know a bit about RDBMS and SQL, then you move on to NoSQL databases. It is not actually NoSQL. It is not only SQL. That's the actual full form. So it is SQL plus additional stuff. That is how it is supposed to be, right? So here you understand what those NoSQL databases are, how they are different from RDBMS, so that you can make a better choice between them in real-time applications. And you will be, obviously in the MERN, you will be using MongoDB as the NoSQL database. So you get introduced to MongoDB, how do you create what do we call the collections, how do you query the collections, how do you populate the collections, that you will be learning at this point. Once you learn the MongoDB as an individual system, then again, we come back to our application and we try to integrate that MongoDB with our application. So from our node, we should be able to connect to Mongo, right? So you have different libraries there like Mongos and etc. So you'll be learning how to connect to MongoDB from there, and how do you basically use commands to populate the MongoDB from the application. How do you query the collections from the MongoDB, and how do you accomplish the transaction management using MongoDB. All right, so those things you'll be learning as part of MongoDB integration. So this is a very critical stage, because by this end of this particular stage, now by then you would be knowing the front-end development, back-end development, and database engineering, and connecting all these three layers together. Only thing left is like, how do you deploy this kind of an application? Initially, we deployed front-end application, but here we have to deploy the server-side application also. So there you will be learning like, what is that obfuscation of the code? How do you distribute the code? You may also try Dockerization at this level. How do you deploy this maybe on a cloud platform and etc. And finally, how do you verify? Like, how do you verify that this entire application is working end to end? Here we haven't touched about testing at all. Not because it is less important or something, but in this case, we are focusing more on the application development from a developer's point of view, primarily from the developer's point of view. But in real-time applications, you also need to write unit test cases. You need to also do a bit of what do we call them, smoke tests and etc. If you learn them, that is good, but not very necessary item when you are learning MERN for the first time. Okay, so that's it. This is the suggested learning path. It may take, how much time it may take? It depends on your caliber, your background, right? If you already know HTML, CSS, and JavaScript well, maybe you may not take more than a month. When I say a month, when you are spending time, maybe at least a couple of hours a day, and also developing code on your own, not just only reading or not just only watching the tutorials and etc. Wherever may be the source, you need to develop something on your own. Within a month, you can develop a useful MERN-based application. Instead, if you are coming from just only a basic programming background, none of these technologies you are aware of in the past, then it would take easily a couple of months of intensive involvement. But whatever may be the case, MERN stack is I would say, is the most easiest stack that to learn, because the programming language you learn for both front end as well as back end is the same. If you go to Java stack or Python stack, you need to learn one programming language for back end, another programming language for front end. There you will have to invest little more time and energy. I'm not saying they're bad, this is good, or nothing like that. If you are starting with full stack development, MERN is popular in the market, easy to begin with, right? All the best. Thank you.